Over 2,000 generations have passed through this land, with their languages, cultures and complex societies. But in 1788, when the tall ships came, everything changed. The British invasion disregarded the original inhabitants and custodians. The next 7 to 8 generations were marked by trauma, resulting in the social and emotional well-being issues we see today. Whole generations of children stolen, families broken. Between 1910 and the 1970s, approximately 100,000 Aboriginal children, especially those of mixed race, were forcibly removed from their mothers and fathers. Abuse and unpaid labour were common, creating disproportionately high levels of social and economic disadvantage. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd brought hope in 2008 when he apologised to the stolen generations. But this did not produce the progress we'd hoped for. If we are to create a better future for our children and our children's children, it has to start right now, right here, with us. It's time to regain control of our own livelihoods and children, to reconnect with our ancient land, speak our tongue and be proud of our culture. That's what Yokai is about. Yokai is an Aboriginal initiative that promotes truth, justice and healing for our people. There's a long way to go in addressing the trauma, but we will never give up. Will you stand with us?
Kaya. G'day. Well, another Australia Day or Invasion Day, Survival Day is here. What do you think about this day or date? I'm Jim Morrison, Chairman of the West Australian Stolen Generation Aboriginal Corporation, WASCAG, trading as Yokai, healing our spirit. Noongar man, Minang Gorang man from the Great Southern, and I pay respect to the Wadjemup people for allowing me to be here for the past 50 years and working on this beautiful space. The Yokai production you are about to see is our way of expressing our thoughts of Australia Day, celebration or Invasion Day commemoration. You will also see some film footage or protests here in Perth and the significance of Australia Day and changing the date. Our Yokai production will include truth-telling, articles relating to Aboriginal Australia, including Stolen Generations issues. We want to include Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal perspectives about Australia Day, Invasion Day. Yokai is our Noongar war cry, but it also expresses unfinished business, call to arms, or taking up the challenge. Let's look at the protests here in Perth. Is there pride in genocide?
My people are the oldest living culture on our earth. We had over 250 language groups spanning across the country and an intricate understanding of our land and country.
Between 1788 and 1872, First Nations people were massacred at 168 sites on the east coast of Australia alone. Massacres of Aboriginal people were typically carried out by hunting parties of soldiers, armed settlers or mounted police, with between 6 to 40 colonial men. It's estimated that between 30,000 and 100,000 plus First Nations people were massacred since the invasion. Yet on January the 26th, we continue to celebrate. But there is simply no pride in genocide.
It's a celebratory day for the nation, but for Aboriginal people, it's not a good day. Our country was founded without a treaty. Aboriginal people were dispossessed in a way that wasn't lawful. In every country, common law country in the world, Indigenous people had a treaty. That didn't happen in Australia. So to celebrate the colonial foundations in this way, it's offensive to Aboriginal people, particularly when we still don't have justice today.
And lots of Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people have protested about Australia Day and what it means and to change the date.
I'm acknowledging that we are meeting on Wadjuk Noongar land, and I'm paying our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And importantly, I want to acknowledge that this land was never ceded. Never. And until this government And this country acknowledges we cannot celebrate this nation. And we certainly should not be celebrating this nation on this day, because this country has unfinished business. And we cannot celebrate this nation until we deal with that business. This day we should be respecting and acknowledging the survival and the health, in fact, of our First Nations peoples and the over 300 nations that make up this country. That's what we should be doing on this day, and telling the truth of what happened, of the dispossession, of the massacres, of the genocide. Acknowledge that. We need to heal this country. So please, call your representatives, your so-called representatives, and tell them that today is not Australia Day, it's Invasion Day. Tell them that you want our unfinished business dealt with, and we want it dealt with now.
They were massacred as they ran into the river. They were shot at. Men, women and children died like this. And for years, people were told that this was some kind of heroic battle, the Battle of Pinjarra. It was an ambush and it was a massacre, and only now really are these massacre sites being remembered around the country.
So we talk about Pinjarra, but prior to that, there were other massacres.
One of the first things that the British did here in colonising the Swan River was to build the Roundhouse out at Fremantle. It's actually an architecturally unique building. It's the only place in the world you'll see these buildings are on the west coast of Africa, because they're actually modelled on the slave buildings there. So although officially we didn't have slavery in West Australia, we had a system of indentured labouring where Aboriginal people, men, women and kids actually were forced to work for nothing really, just rations, some flour, tea and sugar. Anyone who resisted this incursion, this violent dispossession that was happening through the state, they were rounded up and taken to Wadjemup. They died, they were executed, they died from illness, from neglect, poor diet, and they were buried in a mass grave. And it was years until our government would recognise actually that this is the largest mass grave in the country. As a young person, I used to go with my elders to Wadjemup. We'd go around on the boat, the ferry, and we'd walk around the island and around what was called Tent City. Non-Indigenous people, young people, families were actually camping on top of the unmarked graves of our fallen warriors.
It's a very sad history in the life of the nation, but it's a very needful story that needs to be told, and so that our Aboriginal people could see and know their history, and the wider Australians know their history as well.
In excess of 3,700 Aboriginal men were taken over there between 1838 and 1931, when it was reported to have closed. And of those, it's believed that 364 of them died and were buried over there. Research showed me it actually closed in 1905, and that's when it started to become the white man's playground.
I can relive the story all the time, especially when I know that we're not talking what happened in a faraway country. We're talking about what happened on the very land I walk today.
Keep moving, you black bastards!
Get up! Said, get up!
They were told they mustn't kill, they mustn't steal, they mustn't tell lies, and yet all those things were done to them. So why did they build a prison? You know and I know why. They built that for the Aboriginal people, who they said didn't exist legally. Terra nullius, the land of no one.
The cells were no more than
3 metres by 4 metres, and sometimes there was, 15, 16, 18 prisoners crammed in.
Very cramped conditions, a dirt floor, straw to sleep on, no mattresses at that time. Because there was no urinals or latrine facilities in the cells, they would get smelly, the straw might be swept out or sloshed down with water to clean it. In wintertime, their cells didn't dry out, so not only were they uncomfortable, but they were cold and wet as well.
Yongi, Nang, Mindi, Nang, Kian, Noich. Nyon, Ninja Wara, Ninja Mumbarich. Ninja Mumbarich.
Quiet down there! Stop your moaning, all right? The doctor will be here whenever he gets to the island.
Once disease broke out, it just spread straight through the entire establishment.
Living hell.
In 1902, the Rottnest Island prison as such ceased. Some parliamentarians saw it as a good place to sell off and have retirement cottages and holiday cottages on the island. But fortunately, the government saw otherwise and decided it would be retained for the public and converted into a recreation facility on the island. And the quad became part of the tourist centre.
People sleep in the rooms where people were brutalised and died. I mean, that, to me, that is an incredible concept. How could you sleep in a room with that history?
Those people that are managing the island are not necessarily sympathetic towards the cause, because it's just a sign that says it's a burial ground. No acknowledgement that it's, the largest deaths in custody prison in Australia.
To me, it's like dancing on the graves of our people without that knowledge. So I'm sure if people became aware of its history, I would doubt if they would still want to go there and be a part of that holiday merriment.
Did you know that more than half of our Aboriginal population here in WA are victims of the removal of children from families or culture or country? That is 57% being stolen generation survivors and stolen generation descendants.
When we're speaking about reparations, which is a requirement under international law, you have to address these issues. And what Indigenous people say is we want to have holistic healing, and culture is so much a part of that. Our culture is our healing.
Let's have a look at a documentary produced by Andrea Williams and Professor Anna Haybeck.
Since the Stolen Generations issue hit the headlines, we've been haunted by the knowledge that Australian governments forcibly removed Aboriginal children from their families over several generations. Many of us wept openly when we read of the children's experiences, and we asked, why did this happen? Who did it, and by what authority? And what happened to the children and their families?
Their children were stolen now.
The story begins in the earliest days of colonisation. Not content to take our land, the colonists also wanted our children. A politician told the Western Australian Parliament in 1905.
These children of white men must not be left in camps with their black mothers, where they will learn laziness and vice and grow to be a disgrace and menace to our society. They must be put in missions to learn to become humble labourers and domestic servants. It is maudlin sentiment to worry about the mothers, as they forget the children in 24 hours and, as a rule, are glad to be rid of them.
We refused to let our children go. The government would not listen to us and set out to take our children, especially the so-called half-caste ones. We were told the black must go white. Over several generations of state-arranged marriages, Aboriginal skin colour and features would be bred out. In 1937, This genocidal policy was endorsed by all Australian governments. What could we do to stop them taking our children? The Aborigines Act controlled every aspect of our lives. Our children grew up with strangers. They were taught to look down on the ways of their own people. They were given new names and told their parents were dead or didn't care for them. They were meant to never see their families again. We can never know exactly how many of our children were taken, but the West Australian government admitted to the National Inquiry into the Stolen Generations in 1996 that none of our families escaped the effects of forcible removal. Everywhere we see the psychological and emotional damage caused by the breaking up of our families over several generations. Current rates of removal of Aboriginal children in Western Australia for welfare or juvenile justice reasons are the highest in the country. In 1997, Aboriginal leader Mick Dodson told an international forum on the rights of children.
Although the laws and policies of the past are gone, they are now effectively doing the same thing under a different guise.
Many people are still searching for their families. Organisations such as Link Up are essential in providing a supportive environment where they can be reunited with their families, their past and their homelands, and where their wounds can be healed. We have worked for years to bring the issue of the stolen generations into the public arena. The Bringing Them Home report focused national and international attention on our suffering and struggles. The report found that past systems of removal fitted with definitions of genocide under international law. It also presented a package of recommendations for change, compensation and healing to the federal government. But many leaders and citizens did not listen. They still told us the removals had been for the children's own good, that all children, white and black, were treated the same, that we should not judge the past by the present, that we shouldn't say sorry for the actions of earlier generations of Australians.
Sorry across this land.
There were so many missions in West Australia. There was in Perth the Sister Kate's mission, there was the Wandering mission, there was the Nyoongar mission, there was the Nyoongar mission, there was the Moore River mission that my great-grandfather Moses Woibung was taken to at the end of his life from the Karalup mission.
But we soon found out there was nothing to fear, as dear Auntie Vi brushed away frightened tears, showing us love like we were her own, so we soon settled in to our brand new home.
I didn't know that then, but I know it now. With all the sexual abuse that's coming out under the redress, is that the people that looked after us as cottage parents, and we had to call uncle and auntie, they were never screened by the welfare. So you had the dregs of society picking up those positions.
First of all, when we got there was we used to sleep in dormitories and stuff like that. You could hear kids crying at night, all boys. And you'd hear the officers come down and take the young boys out and rape them and all that kind of shit, you know. And you'd be crying because you wanted to be home, and you knew you weren't going, you're staying.
We're mentally abused, physically abused, sexually abused throughout the six or so years that were in there, or 7 years.
The so-called cottage parent who, he was a molester, and there was about 8 of us we didn't sleep at night because we was all watching that door.
They put people in charge of kids that, in those days, they didn't used to screen them, you know, just, you can look after these kids, and you play mind games and fucking flog you and all sorts of crap, you know. And because you're a kid, you just got to take it. There's nothing you can do. You can't fight back.
Was the manager at the time, and it was good for us because when he'd blow that horn, all of us girls would run and hide because he would come and feel to see if we were developing, and so we would hide ourselves out anywhere and everywhere.
So you cop it sweet and you get hard, you know. And as you get older, like now I think, well, I'm such a hard person. I know where it's from. It's from the boys' homes, you know. Like my kids find me a real hard person to connect with me, because I've got a barrier around me. It's been around me all my life, and it doesn't come down, and I don't think it will. You know, and I try to be as good a father as I can, but the damage that was done is with kids. It's sorted our lives out for it. It's got our lives for us the way it is through the institutions that you can't change it. I've had counselling, I've had all sorts of fucking shit, and it's still there.
I feel for the families that it happened to, what they've had to go through. I do question why. Why did it have to happen? Why does it happen?
That's where a lot of the, you know, the trauma started for most of us homies.
But alas, we found, no matter how they tried, the home wasn't ours, and for hours we cried. Tears on lumpy pillows greeted each day as we pined for our own home, so far away.
And the system didn't work because it made Aboriginal kids institutionalised inside their head.
It wasn't the only place they went to. There was other missions and things where kids were taken.
That was the start of the institutions, you know, and it was a long road after that.
That led to the next step, like going from primary school to high school, heading to the Salvation Army Boys' Home in Hollywood. That went on and on and on for 5, 6, 7 years until they got sick and tired of looking after us, as what we thought, and so they put us out into the street.
By the time we got to the Salvos, we got kicked out. They kicked us out, and we were 15. And from then on, it was into the justice system.
Once we left the home, after, you know, we went looking for Mum. We found Mum, but we were out there living on the streets.
Down in East Perth, sleeping in railway carriages and stuff like that, public toilets. And it didn't, you know, like a lot of people look at us and say, look at them there, but we had each other.
So we lived in the streets for probably 3 to 4 years. That's when our life of crime sort of like crept in.
But that was our life mapped out for us. If we didn't do it, we wouldn't have survived, you know. People would have died of alcoholic when we were fucking 16 or 17 years old or something.
We broke the law just to survive on the street, and that led to going to other institutions. And then our life in Fremantle started, Fremantle Prison.
The first time I went to Fremantle Prison, I wasn't scared. I was sitting on a bus, on the escort bus going to Fremantle, and I was with another bloke that I knew from the institutions, and he said, your first time in jail? I said, yeah, this is the big first one. I got 2 months for a driving offence. He goes, you'll be right. And I walked in there straight away, I knew the bloke in the reception. And he said, your brothers have got the clothes for you, so my clothes are already sorted. So for me, it was just another step in the direction that our lives were going.
I was trying to get close to my brothers, and they were always in jail, so I followed suit and ended up in jail with my brothers.
Us boys seem to go from one extreme to the next to being institutionalised, and we spent the biggest part of our life, say from 6 to, I would have been about 28 by the time I stopped going to prison and that.
Same sort of thing with the rites of passage throughout the boys' homes. Hillston, Riverbank, then Fremantle Prison.
How do you think you would turn out, or you'd come out of that, when you got out of that place? How do you think that you would cope? Would you be the gregarious little girl that you once were before you went in there, or would you turn out, hit the bottle, Beaufort Park, lying in the gutter, because you don't know who the bloody hell you are, how you fit within your family that you once loved you and once embraced you.
Days become months, and months become years. Over time we spilt oceans of salty, salty tears, until we realised we were powerless to resist. No hope but still remembering our mother's last kiss.
This was actually a form of genocide that was committed, not because it was a physical killing of the people through this process of child removal, but because it was done for the purpose of ending Aboriginal people as a race of people. That actually meets the definition of genocide under international law. Now, when a country has committed genocide against Indigenous people, it has a requirement to make reparations to the people who've been harmed by those genocidal processes.
Here is Dallas Phillips, Stolen Generation survivor of the Nyoongar mission.
They knew what was going on. In fact, they all fucking knew what was going on, and not one of them questioned it, because there was so much rumours going around that the nuns was turning on each other for going with the monks as well. And many Indigenous girls fathered babies to them monks, but none of our mob want to talk about it. All we were was little sex slaves, unpaid little sex slaves. Oh dear, one time I ran away from mission and I was walking along the road, which you don't do, and the Manach come and he said, "What are you doing out here? You shouldn't be doing this." Back in the car and back to Nyoongar. I didn't go back to Nyoongar, to the orphanage where the black girls was. He didn't take me back straight away. I went somewhere else, and then all I remember is this fucking ugly priest, monk with a, I think it was a brown robe. And he came and he just chucked me on the desk and opened my legs and went like this with spit to put on my private parts. So I became withdrawn, lonely. I became a loner. It was wrong. No, they're pedophiles and frocks, and it was like a ring. They got away with it, but they damaged so many. And we were sent there for schooling, not to be sexually abused, not to have this great big mutt on top of you and he's feasting off you. The amount of times I tried to take my life because I couldn't live with all that pain and suffering.
At this old cemetery in Nyoongar, 130 kilometres north of Perth, these Noongar elders have come to pay their respects to their ancestors. Some lie in unmarked graves, others just have simple white crosses.
Today we're here to demand justice for others. the children who didn't survive this place.
Dallas Phillips attended St Joseph's, an institution that the Benedictines ran for Aboriginal girls here up until the early 1970s. She believes it's time records were released showing who is buried in the town cemetery and, where possible, for any children's remains to be repatriated to their traditional lands.
I would like to see the graves maintained, proper signs, and check where they come from and try and get them home at the expense of the church.
The Benedictine community has acknowledged that of the more than 300 people buried at Nyungah Cemetery, including monks, 47 are unknown, but it says it doesn't believe they are the graves of children. Saying that, the community's burial register, which dates back to 1851, has 275 children on it, and the community says it doesn't know where all of them are. It says some are buried at Nyungah, some at another mission, Moore River, 70 kilometres away, while others remain a mystery. In total, 2,000 Aboriginal children attended the schools at Nyungah over the 100 years that they operated. One of them was Alf Taylor. He learnt to read and write, but was also put to work.
It was like child, labour.
It's been reported that disease, including measles and influenza, decimated mission populations across WA. Today, only 7 monks remain at Nyungah. None of them had anything to do with the running of the schools by their predecessors and wouldn't be interviewed. But in a statement, the monks say they have been doing extensive research on the cemetery and will be installing panels at the entrance, including maps and lists that we've been able to find in our archives.
We need action now. It's gone on for far too long.
Jim Morrison of the WA Stolen Generation Aboriginal Corporation agrees. He says, according to oral history, there are other possible grave sites in the town that need to be investigated.
If there is suspicion of bodies there, yes, why not, as part of the repatriation or reparation, we get the scientific evidence to identify where the bodies are and how many.
The group's calling on the WA government to help fund the research. Nyungah says it wouldn't object to an investigation as long as it respected cultural sensitivities.
The West Australian Stolen Generation Aboriginal Corporation has a healthy relationship with Curtin University, and an agreement, or MOU, has been established. So for the past 5 years, this agreement enables us to work together in advocating for West Australian Stolen Generation survivors. This has now enabled us to bring back to life, through virtual reality, life on the mission. Let's hear from Tim Flowers and other Stolen Generation survivors of Marybank Mission in the Limon project of Curtin University.
Limon is that liminal space where the fence stands, the fence which is in between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And the effort here is to break that fence, to break that barrier, so that the non-Indigenous people can actually listen to the truth, can know what happened in those sites, in those mission places. So it all started with a project called Missions Connect, which was about connecting the survivors back to the land, back to the place where they spent time as kids, where actually they were forcibly removed from their parents, from their community and culture, and kept there institutionalized.
Oh, look, I think the confidence that's been brought about through the survivors coming together, and it's taken time. So from the initial periods, it was about people learning, but also being empowered.
The trauma she experienced, she told me, was very emotional, very physical, and very sexual. So a lot of the kids were sexually abused in there. But she did say she had some nice times in there, as nice as she could. She especially enjoyed going to the bush with the boys when they did all their paintings, and that was a safe haven for her and the school. But intergenerational traumas really hurt me, and I'm feeling very affected by it, and I'm very privileged to be in this project with you.
This project has enabled me, myself personally, because before this took place, I was shy to speak to people about my experience, and also shame. The mob who got all this together have been a big support and also encouragement, and they're patient because they want to hear our stories.
Great crowd turned up today, and even tonight. And I'm really so excited for hoping to see more people come in to see it, because it helps a lot of people bring out their sadness.
You know, very evocative and engaging material that I think is wonderful.
It made me reflect on, well, my, I guess, education as well. So I obviously studied in Australia, grew up here, and just going through primary school, we learnt hardly anything about this.
I think it's a really critical component to help people understand what the Stolen Generations is all about, and also how people from different backgrounds and different experiences can sort of engage in the conversation.
Lemon is collecting voices and from people who also want to have their say, to be heard. I think that for me is the fundamentals of it.
Back in 2020, I met Lorraine Pryor, a strong young woman who stood in front of a camera and talked very strongly about her life and being a descendant of a Stolen Generation survivor. Here is Lorraine Pryor. Her mother is a survivor of Maribek Mission.
I realised my elders had suffered a lot of trauma in the past. I didn't know how it affected them emotionally and mentally and physically. So to see them all drink alcohol was just a norm to me. Little did I know how much they were medicating themselves from the trauma that they had experienced in the Stolen Generation when they were taken away. And these days I see that another poison has come out, which is ice, and that's the next level of poison that's coming out to affect our Aboriginal culture and take away our souls and our spirits. The thing with me, I became addicted to drugs, and I was in addiction for 8 years. And when I hit rock bottom in my life, I realised I needed to be healed for my children. I connected back to my culture, and I started to learn about the histories of my ancestors, the history of my grandmother and my mother, because I used to say to myself, when I grow up and have kids, I don't want to be like my mother. But the thing was, I didn't understand the trauma that my mother went through and the disconnection that she had from her mother when she grew up. And when I started to understand why I never had a connection with my mother because of her not having her connection with her mother, I started to understand, and I started to realise I've got to put that behind me, because I can't use it as an excuse, because they really did suffer so badly back in the days of the Stolen Generation. Taken away from their parents and not being able to have that bond with their parents, not being loved or nurtured by their parents. It's very disheartening. So I take back for what I say about my mother, because I realise that I am affected by the Stolen Generation. Intergenerational trauma is real, and it has affected me. But now I am aware of the situation, and I really want to break the cycles now for the next generation. We need to educate our children. We need to educate the white society about the stolen generation and how it has made an impact on our lives, and that it has flown down and made a ripple effect down to my generation after all these years. I'm so glad to come here today with my mother and my auntie and learn about the stolen generation more, learn about the missions. I'm so glad I'm here at Yokai today. Thank you.
It's very important to understand now that intergenerational trauma is still very much part of our community. So intergenerational trauma has a big impact on Aboriginal communities today in Australia. The next segment shows us the work that has been undertaken to commemorate stolen generation survivors in Western Australia.
My name's Sandra Hill. I'm an elder and custodian of the Wadandi people, the Pibbleman people and Minang people. I'm an artist. My work is about my culture. It's telling our stories, like stolen gen stories. I'm fourth generation stolen. I was taken in 58. How do you find out? How do you get the information when the welfare's done everything they can to stop you from getting that information? They've cut your files out. My great-grandfather was taken when he was 5. My grandfather, Lewis Culgarrett, was taken by the New Norcia monks when he was a young toddler. My grandmother lost every one of her kids during that period. I was taken with my 2 sisters, Barbara and Trish, and my little brother, Daryl. So many of our people can't talk about being stolen. It's really hard to deal with life at an equal level with everyone else because you're always a step behind everyone. You can't get on with life when you have no identity. When I was in the orphanage, so many people I know were abused. Unbelievable how many. I was force-fed all this food and would throw up, and this is when I was 6.5, and they'd hit you and beat you. I've worked on finding family, finding out the truth, and that's given me a lot more resilience, a lot more strength. I live in Balingup, Wadandi country, my dad's country. Yeah, this is the place I want to be.
I remember back in the 60s when a lot of Nyungah and Aboriginal people lived here, this was like a meeting place. Each and every time I come across that bridge and I'm coming into here, I feel like my corpse at home. I'm comfortable here. This is my home where I grew up. And what we had noticed that over time is that it's always been a place of coming back, even when we were moved out of East Perth and into other areas throughout the 70s and that stuff. We'd always come back here, and when we're looking for family or looking for someone to meet up, we'd always come back to here. So this place has always been sort of connected to Nyungah people in that sense. And there's also another level of that, and that's with a lot of our people that were put into the institutions and the missions. That when they were released, some of them didn't even know where their family come from. They had an idea, or they had their names changed, and they couldn't find their way back. But they knew Nyungah people and Aboriginal people were here.
For a lot of years now, we've been congregating here on Sorry Day. The memorial that's about to be developed will add to it, but give another perspective from an Aboriginal artist's point of view, stolen generation artists, and will hopefully strengthen the commemoration and what it means from a truth point of view, because you're hearing far too often that the stolen generations was for their own good, or it wasn't the truth, it didn't happen. And that's what we're all about, is really just portraying what is truthful and making sure that people understand that truth. Because it's not taught in schools, it hasn't been part of the school curriculum. So this is why this is really important.
My whole public art career has been moving toward this moment in time. The whole meaning was about bringing them home. Myas are our traditional dwellings, made from the branches. They were well used and well utilised, and they were refurbished every season. So in the winter we prepared them with new paper bark to make them waterproof. In the summer we'd put new branches over them. They were our homes, they were where we lived. That was our community. I love this, to see the beauty of the realness of it.
I'm Stuart Green. Along with my team here at Big Spoon Art Services, we are realising Sandra's work.
How you've actually engineered it to make it work is mind-boggling. Oh, if this is good for my hands.
I think, artwork's in the public realm. It's an interesting area that you've got to work hard at. This sort of dance of us trying to, tease out ideas and trying to figure out what would work.
This is a traditional Maya. I actually made this with wanang branches, which is peppermint tree, which is the traditional way we do it. You can't get it from a young tree, you can't get it from a very old tree.
All right.
You've got to get it through a middle-aged tree.
The Goldilocks tree, the one that's just the right.
We kind of leapt on the idea of the feathers as being a really strong adjunct to the Mayas.
It's perfect because this is the girls that were taken and this is the boys that were taken. It's collective pain, collective loss, and that unites them. They've been a part of our symbolism for a long, long time, for many generations, and everyone recognises them. Or Noongars, Kimberley mob, they all know these birds, and I couldn't think of a better way to represent those stolen kids than with these feathers. Yeah. And it's also a beacon. When it's lit, it's a beacon to help them find their way home. Most families were left with nothing but their children's footprints. I didn't go back to my family. These are my footprints as well, and my sisters, my two sisters and brother. This is the most important work that I've ever done. Out of everything I've done over the last 30 years.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
I'm glad we could help. The feelings that we need to bring about for significant remembrances or significant events are complex and subtle, and you're not going to encapsulate them all in one work. So you actually need to be subtle about what thoughts are brought into being, and artwork is probably the best way of, creating very subtle, very complex passages of thought that change every time you see the work as well.
People will hear about it and they'll say, okay, that's where all the stolen mob will go for Sorry Day. I think I might go there and ask some questions. This is for those individuals who are still out there suffering from what was taken from them. This is for them. This is for every single one of them.
What you've just seen is a powerful message of truth that is extremely important for our work and in our advocacy for stolen generation survivors and their families in Western Australia. We have chosen Wellington Square site as we have commemorated Story Day at this place since 2006. Sorry Day is always commemorated on the 26th of May every year, but we should be reminded too that this May will be the 25th anniversary of the Bring Them Home report being tabled. The Bring Them Home report is a 1997 Australian report of the National Inquiry into the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. The report marked a pivotal moment in the controversy that has come to be known as the Stolen Generations. A recommendation from this report was that the Prime Minister apologise to Australia's Indigenous people of this period in Australia's history.
The time has now come for the nation to turn a new page. A new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past and so moving forward with confidence to the future. We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these our fellow Australians.
I was in the Great Hall in Parliament when he made that apology with so many people, particularly members of the Stolen Generations, and it was a profoundly important apology. It was a moment of healing for the nation.
Whilst the apology has been perceived as an event of historical significance, to most Aboriginal people, the word spoken by Rudd has been described as hollow and meaningless. The apology was one of 54 recommendations, and few of these recommendations have been implemented today. Western Australia is one of 2 states in Australia that have not provided any reparation or compensation to Stolen Generations peoples. The Native Affairs Department was located here in 1922 and 1945, led by A.O. Neville. That's him there if you want his face. We called him Neville the Devil. This office is part of our history. So that's where the lab, he had a lab down here where we experimented on animals. It's quite an eerie little spot down there. Not a nice spot. A.O. Neville, the Chief Protector, initiated the breed out the colour policy between 1930 and 1960 whilst he was in this office. It was genocide. It was racial engineering way before Hitler. It meant that fair-skinned children or children with non-Aboriginal ancestry were removed from their families. Hence the Stolen Generations. When children were taken to missions, they weren't able to practice their culture or speak their languages. Right up until 1970, where children were removed. You know, we're talking thousands of children being removed right across the country. And it's still being played out today where 57% of the West Australian Aboriginal population have been removed or descendants. And that's the biggest block, I suppose, in the country, and that's purely because of where this man operated, how he operated in this state and how it impacted on mostly West Australian Aboriginal people. It's quite obvious it's still impacting on us today because there's a very high percentage of our children in care today. It all relates to dysfunction, it relates to ongoing trauma. Whilst we should acknowledge the trauma of removal, the many generations of removal, we must also celebrate our resilience and efforts to celebrate our culture and our healing. I now want to show you 2 small pieces that depict Stolen Generation descendants and their efforts and their resilience. Here is a small article about Trevor Ryan and his work on television and in cultural dancing.
You've got to have your language as well, and it's such a honourable thing that as an Aboriginal person could have. Not many of us do have our culture, and for us to have that opportunity to get that back, it's such a powerful thing. we do is it's rewarding. It means giving back to the community, doing something that we're passionate about, and it's our culture.
We would like to thank you all for inviting us here today. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Gina and this is Guy Gauss, and we're very happy to see you. If there's more than 5 people, it's a gig, so we're really stoked. We're very happy to be in this spectacular room, and we respectfully acknowledge that we are visitors to this place, and we want to pay our deepest respects to the Wiradjuri people who've held this place past and present. We've got songs in Nyoongar language for you tonight. We write and perform contemporary songs. This language is very rare, and in my mind and my heart, it's the most beautiful language I've ever heard and learnt. There are less than 400 speakers, according to the Bureau of Statistics. There are 372 speakers of Nyungah language left, so she's a very rare jewel. Those that want to say she's extinct are wrong. It's limited edition. To my mum's story, as a child she was taken, but as a mum she relinquished 3 babies. My older brother, me, in spite of being the most beautiful baby on the planet, and my younger sister. I can't imagine, as a mum myself, it must have been an impossible choice. But she had to make difficult choices, and so this song is for Ngang, my mum. And mum, she falls down and her tears shine on the earth, and my child is gone. Why is my child gone? But we tell her to stand up, no more crying. Walk strong on this land because your babies are coming back. And that's what the 3 of us did. We all came home to our mum. This is Ngang. Ngang pa walin na ju walin ngang. Jan bojak kananggo nganyang mawit balwood cool naju balwood cool ngang bawalin naju walin ngang you are walin you are Walangang Yira Yakngang You are Walingang Yangang Murdich cool in Bujara Ma with you all cool Ngangang Pa Walin Naju Walingang Ngang you are walin you are walingang la da 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 la da da da
The Reconciliation Council of Australia said it's time to be brave, and they're addressing the issue, highlighting the issue of systemic racism and discrimination in the country. And I agree with that, and I'm glad that Reconciliation has called upon Australian people, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, to take these actions now.
Yokai, healing our spirit. Healing our spirit means we've got to have truth, justice and healing. We can't have justice unless we have truth. We can't have healing unless we have truth and justice. And of course, we can't have reconciliation unless we have truth, justice and healing. Thank you. I'm Jim Morrison, Chairperson of the West Australian Stolen Generation Aboriginal Corporation, Yokai. This production has been made possible through funding from the 2022 Australia Day Community Grants System.